And our last bit of time this afternoon is going to be to talk about cat colony management. And I am excited to talk to you about this because I just want to try to share a little bit more of my experience. When I was at Auburn University, I ran a feral cat program for about 7 years there, and it involved managing the cats on the Auburn University campus. I don't know if you've ever been to Auburn. There are about 22,000 students. 3,000 or 4,000 of them live on campus. There are a lot of feral cats on the campus. And so we established a program to try to manage the cats residing on campus. And eventually the program also opened up to the community. In doing that, I spent a lot of hands-on time studying the cats there and eventually developed a collaboration with the Department of Wildlife Sciences to study those. But we monitored about 25 colonies, and 7 of those sites we studied intensively. 4 of the campus sites, the last 4 campus sites, and then 3 additional sites that were immediate to the downtown area. Auburn University campus overlapped into the downtown area. On the edge of campus was some student housing, and then there were these railroad tracks, and then another little student housing area. And those other 3 colonies were in the housing areas surrounding these railroad tracks. So on campus and around the tracks. We looked at these cats for an entire year before neuter return and for a whole year after. So we trapped them, examined them, microchipped them. Some of them we radio collared. Then we released them without spaying and neutering them. Gasp! We watched them for a year, then we trapped them again. That's why I've gotten so good at trapping cats. You have to trap the same cats 2 or 3 times. This is really challenging. We spayed and neutered them, and then we watched them for another year after that. We monitored things like body condition, population variables, home range that we did using radio telemetry, looked at their habitat use, and we also tried to evaluate the role of the caregiver. We really wanted to describe whatever we could. I had a graduate student, Kim Subach. Her master's work is available online if you're interested. It's on the Auburn University website. But we worked to set up some feeding stations. And if you look closely here, what you'll notice in the aerial view of the feeding station is a camera. And that's a little infrared eye there. And so when the cats came in the door of the feeding station, they broke the beam there and it photographed them. So it captured them on film. Some of the feeding stations had multiple cats that looked very similar, so this was a challenge for us to differentiate these cats. So when we radio collared, we put different color collars on them and did some other measures to help us differentiate the cats. But that was certainly a challenge during the photographic sampling. But we got thousands of pictures over the course of the study of some very stunned kittens. And a variety of wildlife as well. Was really quite surprised when the flash went off when they walked in. But they acclimated to it, they got used to it, and they would still come in and eat. So we generated data using this to monitor the size of those colonies over time. We also determined home range on those cats through radio telemetry. And unfortunately, I don't make GPS units small enough to outfit cats, so we had to use radio collars. And then Kim would track as close as she could to the cat. Usually they were in a crawl space or somewhere where she couldn't actually, but we'd get the signal right there and know the cat was there, and we'd take a GPS point there. And that's how we looked at things like their habitat use and stuff. 7 colonies were monitored 1 year before and 1 year after TNR, and so retrapping was required once, twice, 3 times at the end of the study to get those darn radio collars off of the cats. Just to tell you a little bit more about our program, again, I always say it's the copycat of Operation Catnip, Operation Catnap. Before TNR on Auburn's campus, our estimated census, some of which was reflected with photographic sampling and some from just caregiver surveys, was that there were approximately 250 cats residing on the campus. There were all sorts of complaints. There were kittens. The kittens were in poor body condition. Again, once they make it past about that 6-month mark, they're, they hang on and they're pretty hardy, but kittens do not thrive. It's very difficult to be a feral kitten in many locations. After TNR on the campus, we estimated about 75 cats, and we're no longer getting complaints. And actually, the Auburn Safety Unit loved us, healthy, vaccinated cats. Unfortunately, because of a cut in funding, I left my position at Auburn University in 2006. And though the veterinary college there vowed to continue the program, by 2010 the population was rebounding because they weren't continuing to do TNR. And I want to tell you, it's not like you're going to do TNR and then the problem's going to be fixed. It is an ongoing process. There are always going to be new cats coming in, and you have to be vigilant. All it takes is a couple of litters and suddenly the complaints are coming back. So the university decided 4 years later that the program had not worked, even though it did work very well when it was ongoing. And so they elected to trap and euthanize the cats on the campus, the ones that were remaining. So it's a very sad story for me. It was one of the hardest parts about leaving Auburn, and so you can imagine it means a lot to me to at least be able to talk to you guys and share some of the experience that I gleaned from that. So a few tips from the field. We're going to talk more about where feral cats live, how they behave. We've already covered how best to trap them. We won't talk any more about that. How to respond to the common concerns that people have. And then I'll give you a few final thoughts about community cats. The goals of colony management to me are to humanely control the cat population, to try to ensure cat welfare, to educate the public, and to mediate concerns. And I do want to emphasize that proper management of a feral cat colony is a long-term, year-round responsibility and should not be undertaken lightly. The caregivers that work tirelessly in our communities to rescue these cats and trap them and bring them in for care are truly the unsung heroes of the TNR movement. It is a massive undertaking, and it's a labor of love to really achieve population control and to keep it that way. Where do they live? Pretty much anywhere there's an ecological niche. It was really fascinating for me to go and spend a few winters in Ithaca, New York. I'm a big cat watcher, and everywhere I go, I was like, oh, there's a cat, there's a cat. You guys are probably all like that too, right? There's a cat, there's a cat. I got up to Ithaca, and I was like, where the hell are all the cats? I know they're here, but you don't see them as much in that cold climate. They choose their niches a little more carefully where they can truly be more protected. Here we go out and they're just everywhere. Every parking lot. I pulled up literally to the Comfort Inn when I got into town, and there was a mother and kittens. I was like, is Levy playing a joke on me? I mean, like, what? But anywhere there's an ecological niche. So there's a lot of crawl spaces, I think, under buildings everywhere, and certainly on the university campus. So across the university campus, this is downtown, actually, downtown Auburn, in a little alleyway. There's a feral cat that lived here. Actually, that was Scratch, the picture of Scratch that I kept calling the trap savvy cat. And the caregiver would literally open the window and put the food out. Couldn't touch him, you could get close to him, tap on the window, and she really loved that cat. These are the cats from food services. Another view of them. This cat lived at the State Diagnostic Lab. This cat is Josie. She lived at the poultry unit, and I'm going to tell you a story about her later. That's Miss Josie. At the large animal clinic. And everybody's always like, hey, did you guys get the white cat? And we're like, yeah, there were like 6 white cats. We branched out. This cat's actually on the Auburn University Montgomery campus, as is this one. And this is a common complaint because they do like to hang out under cars, and people will complain because they're walking on the cars. That's sometimes a tough thing to mediate, to get them off of the cars. Another favorite place they like to hang out, besides crawl spaces and under cars, is in any sort of drainage ditch. And I learned that they will actually travel under roads and all over the place. And don't you know, like in the spring when we have all that rain, and you know your clients bring you all these kittens in, it's almost like it rains and the kittens bubble up out of these drainage ditches and people find them and they bring them into you. So in addition to places like a college campus, we see a lot of feral cats developing niches at restaurants, at hotels. These are some cats at the Holiday Inn. I went somewhere on vacation, and then I was obsessed the whole time of photographing the feral cats. My husband was like, come on, seriously? So they were going in the drainage ditches there. Of course, they're under the cars. I was spending time talking to the feral cat caregivers. I was completely enamored with one of the caregivers because he had a Y chromosome, which actually is quite unusual. Most of the caregivers, in my experience, are women. And look, he was very serious about feeding these cats, too. I think you'll be impressed with what he left for them. Yes. You know, every day. A well-managed colony. And, you know, contrast that to some of the locations that we had some large-scale trapping in Ithaca. This was an old farmhouse with lots of feral cats. It was practically I guess I will go ahead and just say it was a overwhelmed caregiver that was turning into a hoarding situation, but many feral cats on this property. But they had to have a very protected area in that climate in order to survive. We did a couple of locations like this. So a lot of barn cats and farm cats in those areas. So common niches: college campuses, housing complexes, trailer parks, hotels, shopping centers, restaurants, barns. Wherever there is a supply of foodstuffs or someone with a kind soul that's feeding. There was actually a feral colony that lived under the house next door to mine as well, in Ithaca. And how much shelter they need depends on the climate. There are a lot of different little makeshift shelters that you see, something more sophisticated, and Alley Cat Allies has some great resources online for building these shelters. The door swings off of this so you can get in and clean it up, but it doesn't have to be that sophisticated. It can be a plastic tub turned upside down with a hole cut in one side, plastic dog house. This is a box with some plastic on it, all different. Oh, sorry. One thing that I think is really important to stress to caregivers is to have some sort of structure and some sort of good system with bowls, because one of the other common complaints is people will be upset because people just go out and they'll just crack open a bag of cat food and leave it lying in the parking lot, or use a whole bunch of these disposable bowls and make a mess. I see people nodding. And so they really need to have a better system than that. This is something that we built. I saw this in one of the Alley Cat Allies newsletters, how to make a feral cat feeding area out of a garbage can lid. So then I started trying to find garbage can lids everywhere and attach them to these little fence stakes and put a block there. But we made some very nice, little attractive, unobtrusive. This sort of says, this is what I am. This is a legitimate area for us to put that food. Here's another structure that someone has built, and you can see this doubles as a elevated feeding area, a place to put the bowls underneath so that they don't get rained on. And also some protection for the cats. And it depends on where this is located as to, you know, how you want it to look. Hopefully we're going to try to put it in a protected area out of view of the public. This is a series of carriers that someone has used with tarps in the woods for a feeding area and shelter area for these particular cats. So I'm always amazed at the things that I see people doing with these cats. There's Mrs. Vowell again talking to the vet students, and this picture is to remind me to again emphasize that just because people can't touch these cats, the bond that they create with them is incredible. 45 minutes to tell her to please take up the tins of baked chicken. Really, we're not going to hurt your cats, Mrs. Vowell. We're really going to help them. We're going to vaccinate them and sterilize them. She loved those cats more than anything and just didn't want us to put them in harm's way. But a good caregiver that understands the goals of TNR, that understands that we want to achieve cat control, they really are the key to that process. They're the ones that are going to be sure that we get every last cat. TNR is always great. We're helping individual cats, I believe, with each one we do. But the ultimate goal is to achieve that population control at that colony site. And we need that vigilant, determined person to make that happen. And in areas, probably this is a big problem in Gainesville with a transient population, it makes that very difficult to achieve because people come and they go. It's interesting to observe the behavior of feral cats with their caregivers. That's Alice Henderson. She had been feeding cats on the AU campus forever. Crazy cat lady, totally crazy. These cats, very feral, couldn't get close to them. Alice could. The only one. The only one. And that is so typical for a truly feral cat. They will develop a narrower and narrower touch barrier when they have a consistent caregiver that they're acclimated to that feeds them on a regular basis. Now, there was no way Alice could touch these cats, but look at how close she could get. They will affiliate more and more with you over time. How many of you guys have experienced that firsthand? I have a lot of people that can open the door to their house and the feral cats will run in and run out, you know. That's literally, but you can't touch them. In terms of feral cat behavior, colony structure, it's a maternal-based system. That's their primary social pattern. Queens will communally care for young. We know from good data that kittens raised in communal nests develop faster and leave sooner, and these cats practice cooperative care. Cats certainly aren't asocial and solitary. They're solitary hunters. I think that's where behaviorists got the idea that they were solitary creatures, but actually they live in groups if left to their own devices with very complex hierarchy, pecking orders, and maternal behavior rules with that shared kitten care and cooperative defense. Again, males have a bigger home range, but they still, too, have social behavior and display affiliative behaviors among other cats. When the kittens start to grow up, we have juvenile cats. The females of those groups, remember, they're very, very precocious, reaching puberty at 5 to 9 months of age. That's most dependent on the time of year. If it's February, March, days are getting long, and really matter as long as they weigh at least 4 pounds, the butt's probably going in the air and they're going to cycle in heat and become pregnant quite soon. Springtime brings kittens and the search for the perfect nesting site. So this is how new colonies are formed. We saw this time and time on the Auburn campus. Where did this colony come from? Well, it was a post-pubescent queen with her first litter searching for that perfect nesting site, and lo and behold, a new colony would be. So she would go and find the perfect crawl space, and then we would start the cycle over again. Tomcats a little later to reach puberty with the larger home range. They call on a few colonies for mates. Again, they are social, not that they can't be aggressive towards other tomcats and display territoriality and establish dominant relationships. They absolutely do, as they compete for females and territory and so forth. But they, again, are also a social creature. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the very common concerns that we were called to respond to over my time caring for all these cats on the campus. I always spent Christmas at Auburn walking across the campus feeding the cats because everybody left Auburn at Christmas, and I was like, I guess I'll be here again this year because no one's going to be here to feed the cats. But it was really neat to actually have that experience hands-on. Some of the most common concerns that we had were kittens, pregnant cats, lactating cats, sick and injured cats, construction. There was always construction on the campus, so that was changing the dynamics of the colony sites. And in some places, we had specific colonies where they wanted more cats, like the poultry unit. They're like, we need some more cats. We use them for rodent control and roach control in the barns and stuff. Common complaints were fleas. Some of the housing areas, they were blaming feral cats for fleas. Ants at the feeding stations. We had a child care center on the campus that had sandboxes. Believe it or not, we had complaints that the feeding stations were attracting birds, which I don't know, I thought that was quite ironically funny that they wanted us to get rid of the birds. I was like, are you serious? And then get these cats out from under the buildings. So I'm going to start with kittens. Obviously, most, I think, orphan kittens arise from free-roaming queens. We know that. These small kittens have an extremely high mortality rate when they're born outdoors. We believe greater than 75%. That's certainly what we saw when we were watching. We'd see pregnant queens. We would see the young kittens, the radio collar. They would never emerge from the nest. If they did, most of them were killed from trauma or exposure. It was very sad. Felicia Nutter at North Carolina study found very similar. Okay? I'm sure this varies tremendously depending on the location, but that's certainly what we found. Because of that, my opinion is when we have small kittens where they're still in their window of socialization, we need to think seriously about trying to tame and put those into homes. I understand the number of homeless cats there are. I'm just telling you that's my opinion on optimizing and providing the best care that we have. I know a lot of programs will release very small kittens. I truthfully am not sure how I feel about that. A very small kitten that's released that has a very high likelihood of dying in a month or two, I'm not sure how I feel about that, you know. I'm really not. So we did elect it in some instances to euthanize kittens for that reason. Of course, I'm at the vet school, so usually when I tell everybody I'm going to euthanize them, suddenly we get a foster home wanting to socialize them. But I recognize that's not always possible depending on the program, but it's certainly something to think about because of the high rate of mortality. The pre-weaning age, of course, they're still in their sensitive period for socialization, so it's easy to get hands-on with them. Bottle feeding, though, is labor-intensive, so I always recommend adopting a lactating queen. Cats are excellent foster mothers. Remember, that is who they are in terms of their social structure. It's all about that maternal behavior. There's no question this is the optimizing thing for their social and emotional development. The best candidates have just weaned kittens or have kittens of the same age, and obviously it's ideal to test everyone for retroviruses before. So I always say best advice for raising orphans is an opportunity for adoption, an opportunity for humane education. Remind the caregiver of the importance of spay-neuter, the unique reproductive features of cats, and the problems with community cats. Go to the shelter, bring that lactating queen home. Hopefully one that's just arrived at the shelter that doesn't have a URI is your best candidate. So I gave a talk about kitten care to cat caregivers and shelter volunteers a few years ago and talked about how important it was. And I had one of the people in the room say, well, what if you don't have a lactating queen? And I said, well, if you have cats, other cats, even if they're a spayed female or a neutered male, that the kittens can be around and socially interact with, you know, they may not be getting their nutrients from them, but they'll get that social interaction. That's so important for them. Right? We know that singleton kittens and orphan kittens have a lot more behavior problems. So they sent me these pictures afterwards. They said, Dr. Griffin, I want you to meet baby Huey. He was a singleton kitten that I fostered. And then there's Jimmy. She wrote to me, this is my foster friend Jimmy. He's fat and soft and nice to sleep on. Jimmy's obviously a neutered male. The foster home ultimately adopted Huey themselves. She writes to me, I'm very patient with the little kittens in foster care. These babies thought I was their mother, and he became the surrogate for all the other cats that she fostered. He became quite the helper. Some tips for socializing kittens: separate and confine them. Remember that sensitive period is very brief. I have written out the steps that I recommend. I think you have a handout on this as well. But just so you know, it starts with seclusion and confinement. Select a quiet room, set up a large pet carrier with everything that they need, and let the kittens chill out. Let them acclimate for a day or so. Check to be sure they're eating, but just give them a little bit of adjustment time. Step 2, handling and hand feeding. On the second or third day of confinement, begin handling sessions 3 to 4 times daily, more often if possible. Wear protective gloves, use a towel to pick up each kitten. Start again with the one that seems least reactive and the most likely to accept handling. It's good for those reactive kittens to observe that calm behavior of their litter mates. Approach slowly, wrap them up, expose their head, do gentle massage, feed them with a spatula, feed them baby food, kitten food, hand feed them. The more they're handled, probably the more quickly that they'll be tamed. Step 3, ensuring and continuing progress. Hopefully you're seeing progress over the next several days. They should begin to relax upon handling and may even begin to greet you at the front of the carrier. When they're readily accepting handling and greeting you, they can be released in a small room such as a bathroom that's been well kitten-proofed. Continue regular handling and feeding sessions. Encourage them to interact with toys. Play is a very important part of social bonding. I want to really emphasize that cats all have different personalities, and sometimes there'll be one kitten in the group for whatever reason that just doesn't want to be tamed. The best thing you can do is to isolate that kitten by themselves. Obviously, as long as he's with his litter mates, his social needs are being met by them. And if you put him off by himself, suddenly he's like, I'm very lonely. I do have social needs. Maybe I'll let you handle me. So that can really facilitate the taming process. When you continue socialization, ensure that the kitten's world doesn't get too big too fast. This happens, I think, a lot in the shelter where we take in poorly socialized kittens and we get them really hand-tamed in the cage, and then somebody takes them home and releases them in their house. They start to act like a feral kitten again because their world got too big too fast. So they'll let you know when they're ready to come out. And so let that be in little fits and starts, and then put them back in the bathroom and so forth and so on. And as they progress, introduce them to a lot of different people, try to find someone with a Y chromosome, etc. 2 former students, shelter medicine students, they both became oncologists. Why? What is this? With kittens that they've tamed. The taming process may take anywhere from a few days to several weeks to accomplish. Individual kittens, even within the same litter, can vary tremendously. It's amazing. But I think it's interesting. There's not a lot of study out there on this, but one small study, 70 feral kittens, demonstrated they can become good pets with friendly temperaments, and that handling prior to 7 to 8 weeks of age improves socialization success, which makes sense. In my experience, I've been able to tame them out to 12 to, maybe 16 weeks, but 12 weeks is a good bet. And so we can try to use the pound-a-month rule. Sometimes feral kittens are really stunted and they're smaller than they should be, so looking at their dentition, if you're lucky enough to be able to do that, can help you determine. All right, the next concern, aside from kittens, are the pregnant and lactating queens. What is my advice? Spay them. Next. No, seriously, we know it's very common to capture these, particularly in the springtime. So this is something that caregivers need to understand, that the best course of action is spaying. I can't tell you how many caregivers want to trap the cats, and when they realize that they're pregnant or lactating, what do? They release them. So those of you that are going into private practice, that are going to be working with feral cats in private practice and have clients that want to talk to you about this, this is a really important client ed topic that they need to understand. It's best to spay them because delivering and raising kitten outdoors is very stressful. The mortality rate of kittens is incredibly high. Pregnant queens frequently migrate prior to queening and might go away, and they might not even see that cat again. That's a familiar scenario to anyone who's discovered a mother and her litter on their property, right? Even if the queen chooses to deliver her litter nearby, because you hear them say, I'm going to wait for her to deliver and then I'm going to get the kittens, right? It can be very difficult to locate the nest. We had radio collars on some of the cats, and it was still difficult to find the kittens because they kept moving them, okay? Cats perceive any sort of threat from observation or disturbance, and they will move those kittens. Some caregivers consider confining pregnant feral cats through delivery of their kittens. That's so stressful. I'm not sure how I could recommend that. Others choose to release pregnant lactating queens that they capture, believing it will be in their best interest to allow them to deliver. Unfortunately, even if the cats remain in the area, they'll likely to be difficult to re-trap, and therefore they could continue to reproduce as long as they survive there. So for all of those reasons, I recommend spaying. Even for queens that are in an advanced state of gestation, spaying can be safely and humanely performed. In my experience, cats don't commonly suffer from signs of maternal loss following late-term spaying. Certainly recognize that in dogs that are late-term spay, that some of those dogs have really bad stress, I think, following that, postpartum stress. I'm not saying not to do it with dogs, but I'm just saying behaviorally different. And I think that's part of their physiology. For instance, cats can abort or their litter can die, and they will cycle back to a fertile heap like almost immediately. So I think they're reproductively programmed to just move on. So I find that the majority of queens handle it very well, and I think that's comforting for caregivers to get that information. If queens are lactating, search for kittens if it's a large colony. Know that there may be communal care. That's something I like to tell them because it makes them feel better. Don't worry, there might be another mother caring for them. And it's true because that is what they do. Okay, talk a little bit about sick and injured cats. Should we treat them? These are the questions we have to ask. Are resources available for treatment? Can the ailment be treated at the time of TNR? Will long-term treatment be required? Should they be humanely euthanized? I started out, when I saw a cat with a problem, I was like, oh, God, we better euthanize that one, you know, and then because I was concerned about that cat's welfare, and I thought, oh, that cat's not going to do okay with that. And over time, as I watched these cats, particularly during our study where we're tracking around 100 cats, you know, I was having to release these cats. Sometimes I was ethically opposed. I can remember my mentor at Auburn yelling at me because I released a cat that had what looked like an open pyometra. And he's like, I can't believe you released that cat. You should have pulled that cat from the study. You should have spayed it. And that cat had a live birth. One of the kittens actually ended up, my graduate student found it. It looked like it was going to die. She brought it to me. We saved it. It still lives with her, okay? I mean, that cat, it was pouring pus out of its uterus. It had a live birth. I mean, these cats are unbelievable, the things that we saw them go through and do well with. So I started more and more to reserve euthanasia for very severe injuries, something I was certain was a poor prognosis, or we just had no resources, or there was just no one to help look over that. The most common things, though, that we saw were things like bite wound abscesses, broken teeth, stomatitis, a bad eye, tail wounds, bum legs, ear mites, cuterebra, ringworm. And then we also saw cats that suffered from major trauma, and that was the main thing that would result in euthanasia if they didn't die from that major trauma. My rule of thumb became if the body condition is okay, the cat is okay. If they've been living like that, they've got that ailment, and their body condition is good, they must be okay. Feral cats are tough. Remember that untouchable bond. Sometimes it is truly inhumane to treat a feral cat, depending on the situation. But in some cases, a caregiver will have a relationship with a cat that will get you into a situation where they will want you to treat that cat. So it becomes a clinical judgment. So I'm going to share with you now Mama Kitty's story. Mama Kitty used to meet me here on Christmas Day outside of her feeding station, screaming for canned cat food because her caregiver gave her canned cat food at the same time each morning, and I darn well better be there. And I could even get pretty close to Mama Kitty, but oh my God, don't touch this cat. She would tear you up. I mean, I was like scared of her. I was like, just look. She was as feral as they come. She was an old feral cat. She'd been living there for a number of years. She was probably about 10. And one day, her caregiver came to work. It was misting rain, and laying on the pathway, the sidewalk to the building, was Mama Kitty. She was covered in leaves, she was wet, and she was down, and she was going in shock. And she scooped her up, and she brought her to me at the small animal clinic. Now, her co-workers had just gone in the building before her. Mama Kitty hadn't been there. She knew what time her caregiver got to work. That cat had been laying over in the bushes. She had been hit by a car at some point earlier that morning, had been laying in the bushes where she had to be because we knew from the particular leaves she had on her. And at the time that she knew her caregiver would be there, she somehow drug herself out into the middle of the path where she would be found. She brought her in, and I took radiographs, and she had bilateral SI luxation. She needed a transileal bolt, basically, to screw her back together. She had some pulmonary contusions. I kept thinking she was going to regain consciousness and kick my ass. I was scared. I'm like, be careful, everybody. This is a feral cat, in radiology. But the caregiver couldn't let her go. So we decided to treat her. Dr. Bowling came down, put a transileal bolt in Mama Kitty for us, and she recovered. She accepted handling. It was the first time she'd been handled in her life. We couldn't release her back on campus with that pelvis like it was and her pulmonary contusion. She went home with a caregiver who had 5 other cats, and she lived out her life as the queen of the house. And I have had a number of other stories that I could share with you that are similar. And so I share this with you because I really used to think once a feral cat, always a feral cat. But the longer that you work with cats, as you will see that it's a very fluid thing and anything is possible. And I am a big picture person, and I do agree that we need to really focus our efforts on spay-neuter. But sometimes the human-animal bond will call for additional measures. That's just the way it is when we're veterinarians and we're administering not only to the animals and to the population, but to the caregivers and to the individual animals as well. What about relocation? Well, it's generally not recommended because cats have extremely strong homing instincts. Remember, the R stands for return, but sometimes that also becomes necessary due to construction. Somebody's moving and there's no caregiver to take over, or sometimes we get a request for a barn cat. That was where Miss Josie came in. It's imperative that caregivers understand the crucial importance of returning cats to their original home sites, release of cats to other areas, even those that seem protected, such as a private barn, should only be done as a last resort and with very careful consideration and planning. For instance, LSU wanted to do a study to study feral cats, so they got some cats, they released them on some farm sites, and all the cats disappeared. Because that's what they do. They freak out, they try to go back where they came from. You just can't do that. And that's why, after all, we don't call it trap, neuter, release anymore. We call it trap, neuter, return. Emphasizing that the R stands for return remains important today because there are well-meaning caregivers that'll trap a cat and decide that they're going to release that somewhere else or just randomly put the cat out. And that's not appropriate. If relocation can't be avoided, cats must be confined in their new home location prior to release. They should be in large enclosures like some of those setups I've shown you, preferably with a feral cat den and so forth, and put in a place where they can be safe and be fed at a regular time. We do that for about 3 weeks. Alley Cat Allies has a fantastic relocation protocol, which there's a copy of in your notes. That practice allows cats to acclimate to the new site, become entrained to a routine. They know where the food bowl is. They get used to the lay of the land, the sounds that are around there, and then you can release them. Usually after you release them, you think that's it. They're gone because you don't see them initially. Keep putting the food bowl back in the same place. Keep putting it back in the same place. And most of the time, they will come back around and be relocated. I've been involved in a couple of projects where like a large colony was relocated, and what we saw was we had a very long acclimation with the initial cats that came, but as we continued to trap cats and bring them, and they came, they were like, hey, my friends are here, and they seemed to adapt more quickly. I'm worried we're going to run out of time, guys, but I'll see what we can do. I just want to point out, we know that cats get fleas, and you will see that is another common complaint. People go, well, they're causing there to be a flea infestation in this apartment complex. Probably it's the tenants' cats that they're hiding from you that they don't know that you have that are the problems for the fleas. There was a no pets apartment complex on the AU campus, and they had a bad flea infestation problem. They kept blaming it on the feral cats. I'm a big fan of using Frontline. Obviously, that's something we can only do in the clinic. It's very hard to apply Frontline to feral cats. But I do want to point out that this is one of the most cost-effective things that you can do. Buy the large dog size or the spray and dose it in appropriate aliquots. And also, if you want to also treat ear mites using injectable 1% Ivomec during the clinic is fantastic. In this case, to mediate the concern, we actually trapped the cats and gave them a 6-month injection of lufinuron and explained to the apartment complex owner that the cats would now be exterminators for them because of this. And they loved it. And this was what allowed them to keep the cats in that situation. So sometimes you have to be very creative. Ants are easy. You just put a moat around the bowl. This is a huge problem for some places that you know, everybody's complaining about all the ants in the food, or the ants in the food are creating a welfare problem in the cats. All you do is take a heavy ceramic bowl and set it in a pan of water surrounding, and that's an ant-proof bowl. Sandboxes, another common concern arises when cats frequent the sandbox, and certainly there are public health concerns associated with that. So recommending covers, they're commercially activated, motion-activated sprinklers, prickly things that you can put down, special cat fencing, all of those things. But bear in mind that that certainly is a legitimate concern. We actually made cat box covers, and we're trying to talk them into installing a perfect fence around it that would be going the other way to exclude cats. We had complaints about the birds creating a mess at the feeding stations because they would clean up the leftover food. There's the bird waiting for the food, and we solved it with this. No. Finally, in some instances, the cats were really creating damage and smell under the crawl spaces of buildings, and they had to be excluded. The worst thing you can do is board that up. We actually have some of the homeowners along the borders of campus call us for help too. That's easy though. We just make a one-way door, secure the door over the entrance, give the cats plenty of time to exit, then you can replace it with a permanent door. This is what that one-way door looks like. It's got a hinge on it that only goes one way so the cats can come out, but they can't get back in. It's nice to be sure that they have an alternative structure. We did create, because people go, you know, that gray cat, you know, that black one, you know, the brown tabby, you know, the gray tabby. Nobody can understand cat coat color, so we made an extensive, we call it the C4, the cat coat color chart. They put a black and white copy in your binder, not real useful. If you'd like a color copy, it is available online on the UF website under resources, or you can email me. I passed some of these things around, but I just want to show you just a couple of the resources that Alley Cat allies. Door hangers, info sheets, relocation protocols, barn cat flyers, legal help. They are the leading group for cat advocacy, legal support to help mediate concerns surrounding feral cats, and have some fantastic educational tools. I want to encourage all of you to be a cat watcher and a people watcher, and also to be aware of the differences in viewpoints in different regions of the U.S. as well as in different countries. For example, this was probably 10 or 12 years ago. I was in Australia, and I went in a gift store, and I saw this card. That cat, you can see his name is Lucky. It says, "Some are more equal than others." The back of the card says, "The lucky domestic cat revels in its position within the food chain. Other animals are farmed for its consumption, but not content with this, the cat chooses to hunt and kill our endangered indigenous species." So a very, very polarizing topic. I think probably most of us are on the same page with the answers to these questions, but I still wanted to just flip through these last couple of slides before we segue into pediatric spay-neuter, because these are questions that all of us are asked a lot of times. So I'll tell you how I at least think about these things. What are the answers? Are they a serious public health threat? Should people feed them? Boy, that's a common question that we get all the time. Boy, if you're feeding them, aren't you contributing to the problem? You know, part of the way that we exclude animals, wildlife exclusion, for instance, is through trying to get rid of niches, trying to get rid of foodstuffs, things like that. What about the welfare of feral cats? If they live outdoors, and we know that things can happen to outdoor cats, isn't their welfare in danger? What messages are we sending to society about the level of care that cats deserve? And can one organization solve the problem? So I think Dr. Levy has now presented a lot of information to you that well-managed colonies are not a significant public health threat. To me, they represent cat control, decreasing numbers, and these vaccinated cats are really a buffer, I think, in terms of that. So that's a typical response for that question. Should people feed them? Obviously, being provided with a regular source of food is very good for cat welfare. It fosters compassion. I think it fosters responsibility among people in our communities. And I think that sends a message that cats have needs and deserve care and that they're not disposable. And what I always say is, how can I, as a veterinarian, as a humane agent, recommend otherwise? Because I think that someone in the group here, who was that was talking to me about the was that you that was asking about feeding cats? It was you, Ken. Okay, yeah. And that's a common question, that we are actually making the problem worse when we do that. And I can't tell you that we're not encouraging more cats to come when we have those foodstuffs available, but I am saying I don't think there's any way we could recommend that someone not feed a cat. And this is the one I love. If cats live outdoors, is their welfare in danger? And my response is, does euthanasia improve their welfare? Should we euthanize them to prevent suffering that might occur later? One day, all of us are going to suffer. How many will volunteer to go ahead and be euthanized today to prevent that? Right? I mean, I could walk out and be struck by lightning or hit by a car. Last night, I was so tired the way I was driving, it could have been last night, right, Dr. Carter? So, but I don't really think I'm going to volunteer for euthanasia today.
Does that mean we're giving Dr. Carter the greatest trapper?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, what messages are we sending? You know, sometimes it's discouraging to think about how many cats that we trap, neuter, return, and is the number coming into the shelter getting lower, and are we really making a difference in terms of population control? Well, even if we're not, it's the message that our programs are sending that gives me hope that we can change the way that people look at these animals. You know, people don't always recognize the welfare concerns surrounding cats. They see a cat, they don't think anything of it. I want them to see the cat, recognize that that cat does need to be fed, does need to be vaccinated, does need to be spayed and neutered, and let that become a societal norm. Instead of see the cat or do nothing, oh, see the cat, let's trap and kill the cat. What if the societal norm was see the cat, feed the cat, vaccinate and spay neuter the cat? Getting to that point is what's going to make a difference in the long run. So I think that is the biggest value of TNR programs right now, is that we're sending the right message that in time will help change things and make our society the way that we want it to be. And certainly it's a community problem and a community approach is needed. It's a giant job to do. One organization can't do it all. And for many, many years we've been trapping and killing in response to nuisance complaints. Clearly that hasn't gotten us to a point of population control. So we always have to keep trying new things. If you keep on doing what you've always done, you'll keep on getting what you've always gotten. It does, in fact, take a community. It's about respect for life. It's about acknowledging that they're not disposable. And it's about sending that message through our programs. And so I just wanted to end with that sentiment. And I think all of you guys embody this quotation by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I think that's what we're all trying to do.